Hey, welcome to Fender. What can I do for you? Hey, thanks for meeting with me. I know you're an executive and you probably got a lot going on. Oh, no worries. Anytime. Oh man, I love your guitars. Stratocaster, epic. Telecaster, classic. Jazzmaster, come on. Acoustasonic, great. Is that why you came all the way here? Yeah, that's pretty much it. Oh, no, wait. Your Squier guitars. So some of them have this black plastic plug and the truss rod adjustment cavity, and I don't like it. As a matter of fact, I changed out the one in my Squier guitar for a maple plug. Okay, is that the reason you came here? Yeah, that's it. So did your little modification make the guitar sound better? No. Did it make it play better? No. Did it make accessing the truss rod any easier? No. Well, was it an easy modification? No. So what actual benefit did you get out of this? Well, I think it looks a lot better, and I'm gonna make a YouTube video about it. Hey, get this guy out of here.
Okay, I'll come back later.
So I did a thing. You've seen the thumbnail, you've seen the little intro video. Yeah, I took out the black plastic plug from the truss rod cavity of this guitar and I replaced it with a maple plug. And it serves no other purpose than just aesthetics. And I understand that. Some people might say now it looks worse than it did, and I understand that as well. But it was a learning experience. It was something that I had to overcome because I've never liked the black plastic plug in guitars like this. Usually it's indicative of a cheaper guitar, which I bear the name of Squier on the headstock, and that's fine. Squier makes good stuff, but a lot of the Mighty Mite necks and some of the all parts stuff, some of the cheaper versions have the black plastic. And I don't know if it's a cheaper, more inexpensive way in the manufacturing process versus the walnut plug kind of thing, and walnut meaning wood, of course. I don't know all the reasoning behind it, but like I said, it's usually indicative of a cheaper guitar. And I've always liked the vintage guitars with the truss rod adjustment at the heel of the guitar and no plug or hole at the headstock at all. But, you know, this guitar isn't made like that, and that's fine. Yeah, so that's sort of the reasoning behind all of this. And how it all started was probably more than a year ago, maybe a year and a half, maybe even 2 years ago. I had this temporary fit of insanity, and one night I was like, you know what? I'm gonna get that black plastic off of my headstock. And so in the video you'll see a little bit later, I tried a couple of futile methods that did not work. I stumbled upon something that did work, but was still sort of suspect. And yeah, I mean, obviously I got it out and I made this modification. It's a maple plug, and I had really no idea what I was doing. I had some ideas, but you know, if you watch this channel at all, I don't have the most professional tools in the toolbox. I just kind of use what I have. So it was a trial and error thing, and I think it turned out pretty good. It is definitely not perfect, and I can see the flaws. If you look close up, pretty much anybody can see some of the flaws, but I think it looks better. I would take this over the black plastic stuff any day. So enough of that. In the video you're gonna see, I'm just gonna walk you through the steps. Most of it's gonna be like a voiceover. Some of it will be live talking. But yeah, I'm just gonna kind of show you what I did, my methodology, the things that went wrong, the things I had troubles with, some of the successes, and how it ended up looking like it does now. So thank you for watching. Thank you for bearing with me. Hopefully you'll find this video entertaining. If nothing else, just to watch it and say, man, I can't believe that guy actually did that. What an idiot. But maybe you'll get some good ideas for something like this, or maybe something that you want to do that's related to this. I don't know. But like I said, I did a thing, and if you would humor me by watching it, I'd appreciate it. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you would like to. See you in the next video. So yeah, here are my very first initial, very futile and vain attempts to try to get the plug out after I got this spontaneous urge to do so. I knew I needed to score around the plug where the plastic meets the polyurethane, so to speak. Otherwise, getting it out at all would crack the finish and make a really big mess. So I didn't really know what I was doing, but I did know that at least that I needed to score around the plastic, and I didn't do the best job, but it was pretty much sufficient. And then you can see at the end here, I very comically got a set of hex keys or Allen wrenches out and got one that was basically the same diameter as the truss rod plug. in hopes that it would somehow like grab onto the plastic and pull it out. But I learned very quickly that that was kind of a stupid idea. So then I tried a hair dryer, which again is pretty comical because in retrospect, it doesn't have enough heat to really do much of anything to either the polyurethane or the plastic plug. So again, this attempt was in vain and I was just kind of wasting my time. But I thought, hey, maybe I could soften the plastic enough to where I could take a drill bit approximately the same size as the plug, stick it in there and turn it by hand and maybe get a grip on the plug, pull it out that way. And it did sort of grip into it, tear it out a little bit, but I also learned that it was going to tear into the polyurethane or the clear coat on top of the fingerboard, which I did not want it to do. At that point, I grabbed this sort of angled screwdriver and tried to kind of scrape the plastic out using the flathead end of the screwdriver. Pretty much to no avail. I used that and the drill bit again just to kind of see what I could do to scrape it out, and it really wasn't working or doing much of anything. And finally, I got the idea, what if I grabbed my soldering iron and tried to melt the plastic? And honestly, this is the method that actually worked for me. Now, there are a few things that I would have done differently. In hindsight, what I didn't do was, very carefully try to melt the plastic and scrape it out. So what I wish I would have done is use the soldering iron to soften the plastic and then take something sharp, like scalpel-ish, I don't know, some kind of sharp or pointed object. And as the plastic melted and got soft, I wish I would have scraped it out that way instead of just using the soldering iron like you're seeing here. And I also learned that the soldering iron would sort of expand the polyurethane and make it, come up and sort of flash, I guess, and separate from the wood. It didn't do that a ton, but it did a little further on top of the fingerboard. And then the other thing is that the soldering iron, once it got down to the wood, it scorched or burned the wood. And now, of course, I couldn't cover that up in the end with any type of color because, of course, with a headstock like this, you're just seeing the wood color with a clear coat over it. And it may be tinted or something, but there's nothing to cover it up with, right? So what I learned is that those burn spots, I would have to sand back. And once I sanded them back, I was removing too much material and that I was going to have to go back and fill in somehow. And so all this is going to kind of make sense as we go. But again, in hindsight, retrospect, I wish I would have taken more time on this step because I think I could have done a much better job if I was just a little bit more careful and took my time. I'm just going to show you a quick before and after photo. They're not very clear, but they give you an idea of what the plug looked like before and after I got done with it, or at least after I got done destroying it. So what I ended up getting to fill this hole was a 3/8 inch maple dowel rod. I got it off of Amazon. I don't remember how much it cost, but it wasn't that much. And you can see the sort of state that I left it in. I got the rod, and when I did, I just sort of shoved it in there to get an idea of how it was going to go. And you can see the state of the polyurethane. It's scratched up where I kind of sanded it back. You can see a little burn mark around the hole and close to the edge of the dowel rod where the wood is scorched a little bit. That's what I was talking about earlier. And then you can see on the fingerboard where the polyurethane is sort of flashed and got this cloudy kind of haze behind it. So that's just honestly the state I left it in. And I have a timestamp on this photo. And interestingly enough, it was in March of 2019. And then the next thing you're going to see was when I finally got around to, coming back to this, and that was 4 years later in 2023. I'm going to address this part right here. So you can see where the fretboard meets the headstock. On top of the rosewood, the polyurethane kind of got too hot when I heated up the insert with my soldering iron, and it kind of flashed. I guess that's what you would call it, to the point where I don't think it's going to be repairable. So like, nitro cellulose, you can kind of remelt it, but poly, I don't think you can, and I think it's kind of just gone. So my theory, what I'm going to try to do maybe is take a razor blade, go around it. On this side where the nut is, you can see this just kind of bare rosewood. So the polyurethane just goes up to this ridge. And so I'm going to try to score it around here with a razor blade, and then I don't know if you can see, but underneath it I think I can just kind of chip that off So maybe take like something small, maybe the razor blade or like a small screwdriver or something, and kind of chip away the polyurethane. And then I think maybe I can go back over it with Nitro. I'm wondering what to do about this area too. I don't know if you can see it. I thought maybe it was still shiny, but whenever I messed around with it last time, you can see maybe, I don't know if you can, but anyway, there's shine on top of the headstock where, obviously I didn't touch it, but right here, and you can see shine on the poly on this ridge on the rosewood, but right around the plug, there is no shine because I sanded it down. So I'm gonna have to address that regardless and bring that shine back. So what I think I'm gonna do at this point, like I said, is maybe scuff it up some more and overspray it with Nitro, build it up, maybe kind of bring it back to a shine. That's my theory right now. We'll see how it goes. Okay, I don't know how well I did that with the razor blade. It's obviously not very pretty, but hopefully that will be fixed with the Nitro. I'm going to try now, hopefully, to chip this off, and I hope it works. Well, would you look at that? I didn't get it on camera, but I was able to chip away that piece right there. So I'm going to keep going. It's really hard to get on camera. It's just a fine, minute process, and I'm nearsighted, so I got to get my eyes up really close, and I can't do that with the camera, so I apologize, but I'm just using this little screwdriver tip, flathead, and trying to pry underneath there and pop it off. Like I said, that one worked. I'm going to keep going and see what happens. Okay, so I did some more, and I don't know if you can see this. So there's a little mark there where I scored it with the razor blade, and if you look past that, it pried up the polyurethane past the score, so that didn't work. Maybe I can score it deeper and keep going. That's what I think I'm going to try to do. I'm really just flying by the seat of my pants with this, so I will update you as I go. Okay, here's where I'm at. I was able to chip away with the screwdriver and combination of that and the razor blade to a point over here. Hopefully you can see that, where, hopefully that's in focus. Yeah, so over here is where it kind of stopped, and you can see even where it got off of the maple a little bit. There's a little bit of a color change. Over here, I scored a hard line with the razor blade, just a straight line, and it did kind of stop right there. So I think I'm going to stop and just see what happens when I think I'm going to put the plug in first, kind of shape it and everything, and then maybe just see how that blends in with overspray of Nitro. Obviously, I will tape up what I need to with painter's tape. So I think I'm going to leave right now. I don't want to go anymore because I really don't want to start chipping away on the sides of the headstock or the sides of the neck. Don't want to get into that territory and start, going down a path I can't recover from. So without having to strip the whole neck, basically, I'm going to try to see if I can just get away with this. So after that, I kind of stepped away from the guitar and started to try to focus on how I was going to blend in the maple dowel rod to the headstock. And you can see at the end of the dowel rod, I took some stains and markers and maybe even Sharpies and just kind of try to get an idea of how I was going to blend in the color. Obviously, those colors don't match at all the kind of yellowish color or hue of the headstock. But again, I was just kind of brainstorming. And speaking of brainstorming, at this point, I was putting on super glue as sort of a quasi clear coat just to get an idea of what the clear coat would do to either darken or lighten the maple. Maybe it would, make it blend in better. Again, I was just kind of brainstorming and going through ideas to get some sort of feel about how it was going to end up. So then what I did was take some of my kids' Crayola markers and try to get a better match for the color of the headstock. Yes, I use kids' markers. Listen, I didn't have any kind of like pigment, like Luthier has all these pigments and dyes, and alcohol and nitrocellulose and all this jazz. I didn't have any of that. I'm a DIYer, and I just kind of, once again, fly by the seat of my pants. So I was using this just to get an idea and maybe end up using this color to sort of blend in with the headstock. And I found what I thought was pretty good color. In the end, it was, just sort of this oddball mixture of circumstances, as hopefully I'll be able to demonstrate. But this just gave me a good idea at first that I was hopefully going to be successful in matching or somewhat matching the color of the dowel to the headstock. So then it was finally time to get down to brass tacks and actually cut and shape the dowel rod. You can see here I just inserted the rod into the hole and marked it to give me a usable length of wood to work with. Once that was done, I took it out to my garage and using a hacksaw, again because I don't have fancy tools, cut it to length. Then I was faced with the task of drilling a perfectly sized hole in the middle of this dowel rod without a drill press of any kind. So my thought was I could take a pretty small drill bit and by hand drill a hole in the middle of the top and the bottom of the dowel rod, so from either side, meet in the middle, and then gradually increase the drill bit size to the point where hopefully it will be straight and circular, not oblong or janky looking, and maybe, just maybe, it would look like a semi-professional truss rod plug. As you can imagine, the bigger the hole got, the harder it was to hold the tiny piece of wood by hand. But in the end, I was pretty dang proud of myself for how it turned out. I did have to take some of the drill bits and put them in reverse and sort of wiggle them around a little bit to get the shape of the hole, the cylindrical shape, a little bit more circular and true to size and not oblong, like I said, because of course I didn't have a drill press and this is all by hand and by eye. And then I took some small circular files and did the sort of finer work, detail work by just sort of shaping the hole in the piece of wood to where I thought it looked pretty good. And then of course I had to make sure that the hex key or the Allen wrench, whatever you want to call it, would fit into the inner diameter of the truss rod plug so that I could of course use it to adjust the truss rod when needed. So here you can see the end product of the plug and me inserting it back into the hole of the guitar and just once again making sure that the Allen wrench would be able to fit inside and function properly. After orienting the plug a couple of different ways, I realized there was one way that worked better than the others, so I made a little mark on the bottom edge of the plug to help me remember that orientation when I went to glue the plug in. Here you can see I used some typical tight bond wood glue, nothing too fancy. I dropped some into the hole area, spread it out with a paintbrush. I did the same thing to the outside of the dowel rod, inserted it as tightly as I could, and let it set overnight for 24 hours. Once that was done and the glue was dried, I put some painter's tape down to protect the headstock. I then used a sharp knife to try to get off large sections of the plug before finer sanding. That wasn't working as fast as I had hoped, so I used a Japanese flush saw that I happened to have lying around, and that made quick work of the majority of the plug. However, I wasn't as careful as I should have been, and on a spot where I missed some masking tape, I put a pretty good sized scratch on top of the headstock. Fortunately, as you'll see in the end, I was pretty much able to cover this up. Between the saw, the knife, and a large file, I was able to get the plug pretty well flush to the top of the headstock before doing any more fine sanding. Before I sanded the plug down too far, I thought it would be a good time to test out some of my coloring or tinting ideas, and so you can see here that the Crayola marker that I was planning on using in its truest form, just coloring it onto the wood, was way too dark, so I decided to sort of sand that back, see if it would fade it a little bit, lighten it. And then I tried the method of just kind of smearing it on my finger and then putting the marker on my finger, kind of smearing that on the wood. All this was just really a process, back and forth, experimentation, not really having a clear idea of what I was doing, but just, again, trying out different ideas, hoping for the best. At this point, I knew I was going to have to figure out some type of filler for the gaps around the plug. So what I did is I took my maple dowel rod, the excess that I had left over, and I took my hacksaw and I put 3 sort of slits or cuts into the dowel rod to use as sort of an experimenting platform. And the first filler I used was this generic wood filler from Minwax. The second filler was a golden oak colored plastic wood from the brand DAP. For For the third one, I used tight bond wood glue with some of the maple wood shavings. When it had dried and I sanded away the excess, I thought that the DAP plastic wood blended in the best. It seemed that the Minwax was a little bit too light and the tight bond wood glue with the wood shavings was a little bit too dark. So then I added my special concoction of Crayola, yellow marker, and none of them really blended that well. Even the DAP didn't take the color that great. It didn't blend as well as I had hoped. But I thought, you know what, I'm just going to press forward. I applied the DAP wood filler around the plug, and then I experimented with adding the yellow color with a Q-tip. It was a little dark, so I took some 600 grit sandpaper and sanded it back. I was fairly happy with it at this point, but I knew I was going to have to address another issue, and that was the intersection of the maple dowel rod with the rosewood fingerboard. If it hasn't been obvious enough by this point, the overall goal of what I was going for here is sort of the vintage look where there was actually no plug in the truss rod cavity. The truss rod adjustment was actually at the heel end of the neck. In those vintage examples, the rosewood fingerboard sort of ends in a line that goes perpendicular to the headstock or parallel with a nut. This is even the case, for example, in my Musicraft custom Strat neck, where the truss rod adjustment is at the headstock, but there is no plug in the truss rod cavity. There's simply a hole in the headstock. So what I did was put some painter's tape down in the area that I wanted to focus on, and I got some generic brown acrylic paint. I think I got it from Walmart. It wasn't more than maybe $2, super cheap. I took a paintbrush and applied it to the semicircle or the arch of the maple plug. I let it dry overnight and put a second coat on the next day. And at this point, I was confident enough to try and apply some clear coat. So I need to step back a bit here. I know in earlier parts of the video I talked about using Nitro as a clear coat over the top of the headstock, and I even considered at one point taking all the finish off of the neck, that being polyurethane, stripping it, and even taking the decal off, putting a Fender one on there, going the full Monty, but I decided against all that. I thought that would be a little bit too much work, more than I wanted to bite off and chew. And so I decided to go the more simple and straightforward route and just use a polyurethane or enamel-based clear coat like what was already on the guitar. In this case, I just used a pretty generic Rust-Oleum 2X Ultra Cover Gloss Clear, and I was pretty happy with the results. What I wasn't happy with, however, was the way that the wood filler around the plug looked underneath the clear coat. It was sort of odd because in some lights or angles, the whole configuration looked basically indistinguishable from the rest of the headstock, but in other lights and angles, it looked pretty hideous, to be honest. So I knew what I had to do, and as painful as it was, I had to strip back the polyurethane and then sort of dig out the wood filler around the plug. I honestly went back and forth with several experiments off camera using various iterations of wood filler. I tried the Minwax stuff, I tried wood glue by itself, I tried wood glue with some more coarse wood shavings, I tried wood glue with finer sort of sawdust, but nothing was blending in like I wanted it to. So I got the idea, what if I took some fine shavings off the maple dowel rod with a knife in sort of the same generic shape as the areas that I needed to fill, and tried that. So I took the little wood shavings, glued them in place, let them dry overnight, sanded them back, added a little bit of color, and although it definitely still wasn't perfect, it was pretty much the best I could come up with. And once I added some clear coat, it kind of confirmed, yeah, this is pretty much the best I'm going to get. Now, interestingly enough, as I was editing this video, I came across a guy named Bo Hannon Guitars on YouTube, and he was fixing a crack or repairing a crack in the headstock of a Fender guitar, and he actually used acrylic paint to sort of hide or mask the discoloration between his epoxy filler and the rest of the maple headstock. And I thought, wow, that would have been a great thing to try had I thought about it. So I had, of course, the brown acrylic paint, but I could have gotten some like wheat colored or really light brown, sort of tan, yellowish colors to try to experiment, especially since the acrylic paint is really cheap. I could have experimented with some different coloration to try to hide the problem areas I was encountering. But hindsight, of course, is 2020, and I did not do that. So let's continue on and see where I got to. With my initial coats of polyurethane, I had covered up part of that headstock just to kind of get an idea of what I was working with. But in the end, I knew I was going to have to sort of blend in the old polyurethane with the new polyurethane. And so what I did was take some 400 grit sandpaper and sanded down the entire front face of the headstock. What I encountered next was a really strange phenomenon in that some areas of the headstock would not accept the polyurethane. I don't know if there was oil in the headstock or some kind of chemical reaction or flashing, but those areas were just bare, and it was like they had, repelled like a magnet, the polyurethane. And so I had to sand back and actually peel off the new polyurethane just so that I could spend several days trying over and over not to get this reaction to happen. And finally, I landed on something that I was happy with. I don't know exactly what I did differently, but it just sort of worked, and I wanted to leave it alone. I did try to get rid of some of the orange peel towards the end with some 400 grit sandpaper, followed by a final few coats of clear, and I think that turned out well enough. So this is where I landed with this thing. I'm not going to do anything else to it. I'm satisfied. It's not perfect. You can see a little bit of orange peel in there. I didn't wet sand it or anything, and as a matter of fact, on the edges, it felt a little rough where the new poly maybe built up a little bit. I just took some steel wool and like went around it a little bit just to kind of knock it off. It still doesn't feel perfectly smooth, but I'm not going to nitpick about it. It doesn't look different as far as the front to the back, really, other than this is more polished, more glassy, obviously. And this has a little bit of that orange peel, like I said, but I really don't care. Wet sanding has not been favorable to me in the past, and I pretty much hate doing it, and I don't want to risk messing this up. So yeah, the truss rod plug, it is what it is. Not absolutely perfect, but I would take this over the black plastic plug any day. And it's got my signature on it. I've messed around with it and made it a project. So yeah, I can't wait to get this thing back together, play it finally. It's been a long time. That's all I got. Thanks for watching. Word to your mother.